meeting is being recorded.
I'm just going to mute the last person that's not muted. Right. Okay, hopefully you can see this. So today I've not got a huge numbers of slides, and we haven't got too big a group. So I'm thinking we can have interrupts as we go along. So, raise your virtual hand and unmute yourself if you want to butt in and make a point about what we're talking about. So open source software. I want to get this working. Right. So this is what I thought we'd roughly talk about today. Talk about how software is built. We can't really talk about open source until we understand how software is built and produced and generated. We'll have a look at some how popular open source projects are. And I think we might be surprised about how much of our infrastructure today is actually completely dependent on open source software. Some pros and cons, of course. I'm sure you've got your own thoughts on that. A discussion of what free actually means, licenses, a few examples, and a bit of a special case about generative AI, because they seem to have warped the idea of what open source means a bit. Now, I was thinking just this morning that I was working in IT, fairly near the beginning, and maybe certainly in the 70s and in the 80s, source code for software was the norm. Universities would sit there and write some code, they'll share it with other universities, and there's no issues. And we've been through a phase really of commercialization of software. Companies have sprung up and realized that software is something they can make money out of. So they, spend money on developers and create bigger and better code and start selling it. I've noticed though recently there's almost been a reversal about going away from commercial software back into open source. So kind of interesting the way the dynamics is going. I think there's some tie here with social media. We've seen a lot of push of people move into commercial social media platforms, and now we're starting to see people move away from the commercial world onto the more open platforms as well. So, maybe there's some social stuff going on there as well. So let's kick off with the software build process. And this is generic, this is how software engineers work. So for most of us, we've got our desktop, it might be our phone, it might be our tablet, our computer, it could be anything, and we install binaries on it. So we might go to a package manager of some sort, select from a list, install Firefox or whatever it might be. You might go to an app store of some sort, or you might download a binary. However, the installation process is you're downloading a binary from somewhere and installing it and running the application on your device. And that's great. But of course, there's much more to the story than just suddenly this binary appears. I'm going to, I keep hearing some background noises. So we've had some binaries on a desktop. Where does that come from? Well, the software starts off as source code. And this source code is really, I suppose, a collection of files, very often text files, written in some sort of computer language, such as C or C++ or Java or Python or whatever it might be. So I'm going to hit mute all. I'm hearing some background noises. But the source code may not only be, a computer source code. It could be images, configurations, translations. So if you got your desktop, you install Firefox, and your desktop is configured in French, and you're going to see all the error messages in French, and all those translations are part of the source code. You have big files that says, URL not found in French is this text. So the source code is, really quite a big bundle of files. And what the developers do, they go through a build process where they take that source code, they build it into binaries, they test it, they usually package it up, maybe put it in an archive or have some sort of crypto signature on it, install it on an app store of some sort so that users can actually finally download what we've built onto their desktop. So we start off with source code, lots of collections of different types of files, mostly computer code and probably different languages. That's compiled into binaries, go through some sort of test process, hopefully, mostly automated testing, packaging, and then installed on your desktop. And this is, the same for every sort of developer in the world, whether they're doing open source development or they're doing closed source, working for a big business, doing internal work. This is the sort of process you go through it. Now, the reason I've done this is that if you can only access the binary for a given application, that is generally termed closed source. You don't have access to the source code. If, however, you have access to the source code and usually all the tools and processes used to build and test and packaging, then those projects are called open source. So with open source applications, you've got a chance, if you've got the skills to do so, is to download the source code. You could modify it. You could go through this process and install a binary on your desktop outside of the people actually writing the code to start with. So difference between closed source where you only get the binaries, you download it, and open source where all the source code is available somewhere on, usually on a website. Now, I said that you could modify the source code if you had the skills. That's probably easier than you might think if you're not doing it, but this is also useful to you even if you're not a software developer, because the simple fact that the source code is available means that other experts are looking at it, examining it, checking it for errors. You might have a worldwide team contributing to this source code to make it better, to fix bugs, add new features, and so on and so forth. Closed source, and by definition, is usually owned by a company, wrapped down, and not available for other people to work on. So I'm looking for hands going up. If you've got anything to say, then do just put your hand up and say anything. Okay, so what I thought would be good to look at is the popularity of open source software. Alan, go on.
Yeah, sorry, I was a bit late putting my hand up. On that, mainly I want to talk about the testing part, because some piece of software is produced by a commercial organization, it has to be right. And so there's rigorous testing going on and it gets validated and they do the best. You can never be perfect, but you do your best to get it right. If it's an open source code, anybody, in fact, numerous people can come along and change the code and republish it. And if there's AI being used as well to generate some of the code, how are we going to be sure that the open source code has been properly tested and will work?
And usually the process is exactly that I described here, and that is you can't ship something until it's gone past the test. These tests are usually like, I don't know, 95% automated. So this test code is test is code testing code, and it'll go through lots of various test cases. The test cases are usually written from the requirements. This is an area I used to work on. And so you'd never get to a packaging or release phase until all these tests have passed. So yes, you could go and change source code. If you've fixed one bug but created a different bug, then these tests would fail, or hopefully fail.
Let me just very quickly. I got an AI program to produce a piece of Python code for me. to play to do a game, in fact, a children's game of Hangman, but with the the school curriculum, vocabulary. Now, if I posted that on and it wasn't working properly, I mean, it's a trivial example, but could I have just posted that online somewhere without it being tested at all?
You can do what you like. You can create an account. I'll go through places like GitHub in a minute, but absolutely, if you want to, create some code and put it up for other people to use, absolutely go and do that. I do it all the time. I've got accounts on these servers, and people can download my source code and play with it. Um,
I,
so
I could put it up untested.
absolutely, you could. Yep.
Yeah.
Nothing to stop. And you're just sharing your source code with other people, right? That's what it's all about, is sharing. The nice thing is, if you put up your game on a site and said, here's my nice brilliant game, and you might get other people say, right, I found a bug in here, here's the fix for your bug. You might get other people trying to help your project to get better.
Okay, that's fine. I need all the help I can get. Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah. So popularity of open source. I mean, I think, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the word open source was quite looked down as being poor and not used and full of hackers and security issues and all the rest of it. But if we have a look at what big projects are actually in use, you might be surprised. So here's a category of software, which is databases. And here is the top databases in the world. Okay, I've got a link there where this came from. A company called Oracle is number one, just. Oracle used to dominate the database software area, but no longer. There's loads of different types of projects, softwares you can use to, hold your data in and do queries and whatnot. Now, if we look at this top 10 of software of databases you can use, most of them are actually open source. These green ones here are open source. So Oracle's not open source. MySQL is, Postgres is, MongoDB is, Redis is, Databricks, Elasticsearch is. Most of databases in use are open source, which means that if you've got a need to have a database on your desktop, the MySQL, you can just download and use it for free. You can also access the source code. So, if you're clever enough to fix bugs or add news translations, all this is available. So in databases, there's an awful large number of open source projects, and databases is one of the core technologies that really what runs modern IT systems. Peter.
What does score mean, please, Peter?
This is a popularity ranking. They've come
Popularity,
up with
popularity meaning what? Sorry.
how many deployments, how often they're used, because it's quite complicated because one database could be used by millions of people. So they calculate these score by, it's a popularity score, really.
It's quite odd, these figures. You got minus 77, minus 151, and now we got.
Yeah, this is the current.
Make sense of this.
This is the current popularity, this November 2025 comment. And this is the variations. It's happened between October, November, and November 2024. So this is telling you how much, how popular they've come, or how less popular they've become.
Has Oracle become more popular in that year? Is that what you say? Is that what I understand?
Yes. No, since 1 month, yes, since that date, it's become slightly more popular, and since a year, yes, they've become more popular. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I just really a comment. One of my roles before I retired, we needed a small bespoke, product to manage what we were doing, and we bought it off the shelf. And it was great, but when we set it up, needed to run on a server. We wanted to have our dedicated server in the data center, and I have to say I was absolutely outraged when I realized we were using Microsoft SQL Server, and they charged to use this database with this software we bought. We had to pay per person, per processor on the client machines. So if you had a processor with 8 core or whatever, you had to pay the license 8 times for every user. I mean, I could not believe how much these things are. So anyone, the popularity of free open source is fairly obvious when you look at the outrageous way that the proprietary people behave.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's doubly annoying once you realize that Microsoft SQL Server came from open source project Postgres. But of course, when companies buy software, they tend to have a checklist of what they need, and one of them is support. And so you can see why companies pay money for software just to get that support. Databases are one of these things that's going to hold a company's data, and if it fails for any reason, that company could go under. So, paying for support is kind of quite a reasonable thing, but we'll talk a bit more about that as we go on. But yeah, your point's well made. Here's another category of software. Again, modern internet contains lots of different websites, and those websites are run by different software stacks or web servers. And of course, there's a few web servers that are very popular. And here's a list. So Nginx, I'm told it's pronounced, Apache, Cloudflare Server. These are the software stacks that run websites. And again, if we highlight them in green, which ones are open source, we can again see that most of the world's web servers and therefore websites are actually open source projects. And here's a last sort of popularity one is operating systems. Now, if I asked most people what's the most popular operating system, they'll say, Microsoft Windows. Yes, you know the answer. But the thing is, many devices, or all devices really, most devices need an operating system. So I've got an operating system on my mobile phone. It's an Android phone. I've got an operating system on the set-top box that's linked to my television. I've got an operating system on the sat nav in my car. I've got operating system on my servers in the cupboards and so on. And when you look at all the types of operating systems, not only desktops, then you get a picture like this. This is a little bit old, but even then, most operating systems deployed in the world are based on Linux in one way or another. Linux is by far the most popular operating system in the world. Most of the websites you use day to day are Linux powered with open source web servers on them. These little integrated systems, like my television set-top box, that's Linux. My phone runs Android, that's a form of Linux. All my servers are Linux, and it goes on and on and on. So the world really does work on open source software. That's the point I'm saying. Peter.
I think you're cheating here. I think Android would be Android's not even mentioned because you put it lumped it with Linux, and then on top of that, where does the source of the Apple operating system, Apple OS in there either?
Apple, yes, no, Apple is in here actually. So Mac OS,
Mac OS on what?
Is based on Berkeley Standard Unix. So that's the dark blue color here.
But it has forked a long way, and that's all the phones in the world. You've got all the phones in the world, which obviously really a massive compared with the desktops. The number of phones out there, aren't they?
Yep. But say this is the information I got from 2024.
I'm a bit suspicious, Peter. Okay, thank you.
You think Linux is bigger?
I don't know how I'd classify between Linux and Unix in this, because you forked. These things are all forked because Windows also contains Unix,
No,
doesn't it,
no,
as
no,
well?
no, no. Linux is not forked.
Is Linux not
Linux
forked at all?
is a right from scratch. That's why it's a separate category.
Okay,
Unix, yeah, yeah. We could have a talk about this.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
But Linux,
I used to work for
Linux,
a company called Unix System Laboratories, and we used to sell the source code to Unix.
but Linux came from originally, presumably Linux came from Unix in some form, didn't it?
No, no, it was written by scratch, from
Was
scratch.
it really?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it wasn't the okay, I didn't know that. Interesting.
yeah.
Torvald
No,
Linolds, wasn't it?
He wrote it, but he must have.
yeah.
Okay, he didn't use any source code at all
I'll,
from Bell
I'll,
then.
no, no,
No
no.
source.
No, he started from scratch.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing I'll say on this is Unix is actually two things. One, it's a standard, so you can go and download the standard, and it documents how these operating systems should behave, and they've got test suites and so on. And there's also several implementations of those standards, which really came from, Bell Labs, AT&T, and various spin-offs like the Berkeley Standard Distribution. So yeah, you can argue a case for Unix, but Linux is a brand new operating system, well written from scratch, but conforms to the Unix standards.
So you're saying to me all the Android phones and all the Apple phones are lumped under a label called Unix? Are you telling me that?
Yeah, I think that's what this diagram is saying. I mean, you can go on the link
Okay. All right.
well, this is this
I'll
to
stop.
be fair, this is server operating system market, I suppose.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah,
Okay, fine.
yeah,
I'm getting it.
yeah,
Okay. It's not
yeah,
client as well. Okay,
yeah,
fine. I understand that. Okay, fine. Thank you.
yeah. Okay. So pros and cons. I mean, we can have this debate about pros and cons. I will go here. This is, my sort of made up perspective, really. So we got closed source way of doing things where you go to a commercial company and you buy a binary from them versus open source where you again you download a binary, but you got the source code available and the ability to build it. So the cost comparison in terms of money, closed source is variable, of course, but it's usually expensive and can be very expensive in terms of databases, as we heard. Open source tends to be free. You can download it. Although, sometimes you get little hooks to contribute or pay more for support or something. And openness, in other words, how easy is it to extend it or change it in some ways, even as simple as like changing the colors on a graphical app. With closed source, you'll often have little or no options to make changes to the software. But the open source, of course, is open, providing you've got the skills to do it. Similar to customization, closed source is usually fairly limited the way you can tweak things. But really with open source, assuming you've got the skills, the sky's the limit how you can change that software to make it behave the more closer to what you want. Support is an interesting thing. Closed source, I've labeled here poor to excellent. So if you're a commercial company making widgets or something and you buy in a software package, you'd expect pretty good support for that price you're paying. But I've noticed that sometimes people pay for support, even things like support for Microsoft Windows, but actually don't really get the support. You can log an issue and they'll say, "Oh yeah, reboot it" or something. They're not going to fix bugs for you or something like that. So I'll put support here. It can be really good for closed source, but of course it can be throwing money away. And open source, I've also put poor to excellent. The key here is with open source, you have to figure out how to engage properly with a team that work on that software. You can get brilliant support with open source, but you can really annoy those developers if you don't approach them in the right way. Security, here's another interesting one. If a closed source application is, the source code isn't available, there's no way for security companies to inspect the source to see how good it is security. It might have loads of security issues on it, but they're just simply unknown. Open source, the source code is available for security inspection. So, but I would say, really, by definition, really, the security of open source could be significantly better than closed source. And finally, quality, easy to use. Of course, the closed source company is going to be selling this, so it's got to be high quality, it's got to be easy to use, and so on. Open source can be very variable. Some really fantastic open source, easy to use projects, and there's some really bad ones out there as well. Tom.
Yeah, I just recall that was someone brought to my attention the Supreme Court in Spain, which recently ruled that the government, which was kind of taking major public decisions affecting the public, and they could, based on software, and the public had no way to scrutinize to see whether the decisions affecting them were correct. So the court ruled that the public should have the right to inspect the code, and so that's actually, trust is also another issue. And I think during COVID, a lot of countries, including this one, although they dragged their heels over it, the COVID app that was brought out by most countries, they promised it would be open source. Britain promised that, but I think it took them a while to get the ball in the net. But all the other countries, Germany, etc., went open source so that the public could see they weren't, there wasn't anything behind the scenes going on.
Yeah, good points. Good points. Another reason I think European companies are looking towards open source is simply to escape the clutches of US companies. A lot of the software and online services we use are just US based. And in many cases, that's going to be against, GDPR rules, data storage, and you don't want to use a platform which is, bent to some billionaire's point of view, let's say. So, the country of origin is coming up a lot, I'm seeing in European Parliament discussions. Okay. So there is this halfway house, which I actually quite like it. You don't have to go open source with community support and closed source with corporate support. There's often this middle ground that you can have. So there's a few projects that are really open source, but you can also pay for support. And these, you'll often see that employed developers working in these commercial companies will also contribute to the open source code. It's a bit of a weird way to work. It's a commercial company giving away their code, their experience. So it's a bit of a strange one. A couple of examples which came to my mind immediately. There's a project, open source project called Wine, and that stands for Wine is not an emulator, and it's a way to run Windows applications on Linux and some other Unix-like operating systems. And it's not an emulator, it's actually quite clever. It runs the code native speeds until the code tries to draw a pixel on the screen, and then Wine intercepts that call and calls the Unix or Linux equivalent to draw some. So Wine is a project, massive open source project to get Windows applications on Linux in particular. But there's this corporate entity called Codeweavers, who you can buy Wine from Codeweavers, and they'll offer you support. They'll give you guarantees of some that certain Windows applications will work. They'll support various versions of Microsoft Office running on your Linux desktop and so on. And so, as a consumer, you get the choice. Do I go to the open source download it and run it, and I might need some time to play with that and get right? Or do you go to Codeweavers and get pretty much the same thing, but it's going to be a nicer installation experience, it's going to be easier to use, and you're going to get support for it. I can see a couple of hands. I'll just finish this slide first. Linux and Red Hat is another example. Red Hat is a company that sprung up out of Linux, really. And you can go to Red Hat and you can buy Red Hat Linux, which is their brand of Linux. And of course, the Red Hat team also contribute to the source code of Linux. So there's this symbiotic relationship here. And of course, you can always pay for the developers, and there's quite a lot of other projects that work in this way. This like halfway house really between open source with support from communities and closed source where you get support commercially. So Steve, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, another possible motive for moving away from commercial software is in relation to the cloud. Now, I, for one, am getting absolutely sick and tired of being constantly told on Outlook that I'm running out short of space and I won't be able to send or receive emails. This is one reason in particular why I'm looking forward to moving away from Windows. Leaving that aside, there is also the question of who actually is also looking at stuff on the cloud. Now, if we think about it, there's an awful row some time ago with what was it WhatsApp, where the government was going on and on and on because they're encrypted from end to end, and there was an awful row about it, and I basically died a death, and I gather nothing's changed. But you see, what they've done in going on and on about WhatsApp is to highlight the fact that there's never any comment at all to that same effect about the cloud.
Yeah, good point. It's slightly different to closed versus open source because, of course, you can run closed source software on the cloud, you can run open source software on the cloud, and you can run closed source applications locally and open source applications locally. We might do a talk at some point about self-hosting email servers or self-hosting pretty much anything. And there's a good discussion going on in the Fediverse about hosting, which is a way to run hundreds of server type applications that you can control, email and websites and a whole bunch of different stuff. So it might be a good thing to cover actually. And as you say, if you are using Google services or Microsoft services, you don't really know what they're doing with your code, with your data. Paul.
Yeah, hi. You said Wine software. Is that for can that be used for running Windows programs, not Windows itself, on Macware? And or do you use Parallels or a dual boot or a virtual machine for that?
It's a really good question. I don't know. Have a look at winehq.org, I believe.
Okay,
There's probably no reason why you can't port Wine to any other Unix-like operating system.
The reason I ask is there's an awful lot of stuff that only does run on Windows, and if you've transitioned over to Mac, it is slightly more limited. But there's also been stuff in the news today that huge numbers of people are migrating off Windows 11 because of the spyware that's on it and the way it's managing the integrated autopilot and AI stuff that is in theory meant to be helping you get your work done, but in practice, the way it's doing it is somewhat suspect.
Yeah, good
I'll
point.
see if I can find the link to the article.
Yeah, good points. Thanks, Paul. on your first one about running Windows apps on Mac OS, when I first moved to Mac, so I spent a lot of time getting, emulators up and running and playing with it and stuff. A complete waste of time. I actually don't use any Windows apps. I just simply find an alternative.
Yeah, it's some simulators like Flight Sims and other stuff like that unfortunately have been built thinking that most of the world runs Windows, and it's probably true
Yeah,
at
I
one
think
point. But
people tend to use Steam or something like that, don't they? For games these days. Yeah, your other point about this is a good one actually. I should have added this to the slides about closed source software wherever they're working. You don't really know what they're doing. So they could be, taking screenshots every 10 seconds and uploading it to some AI system for training. Who knows? If it's closed source, it's locked down. You really don't know what it's doing. Yeah, so we often see the word free with open source, and I thought it's worth thinking about what we meant by the word free. So you see like free software, all right? And the problem is the word free has really two complete separate meanings. The Free Software Foundation makes a point. They prefer to say the word free means a liberty, a freedom, an ability to do something that you may not be otherwise doing. Nothing related to price. But of course, yeah, so they also use the word gratis as being a freedom. So you've got the freedom to change the source code to modify it as you want. You've got the freedom to build it on a different system than it was designed for, and so on. There's also free as in a price, or they also say, free as in beer, a free pint of beer. So there's two meanings of this word free. Free as in speech, free as in beer. And it's quite often to think that free always means price, but that's not the case. Free, at least from the Free Software Foundation, free may mean freedom rather than price. So we've got open source software, or OSS. We've got free open source software, or FOSS, and free in there specifically does mean liberty, not price. But of course, you've got FLOSS, which is free Libre open source software. So you've got the freedoms to use that software. It's also free. That's what FLOSS really is telling us. So slightly different meanings of the word free. And of course, that brings us on to licenses. So really, most software, whether they're open source or closed source, come with a license. And the license tells you how you can or how you can't use it. Three really main types of licenses you see with open source software. The first one you actually very rarely see these days is just public domain, and it's really where there's no license attached to it at all. So if you find some code on the internet, some software on the internet, and it's got no license to it, by definition, that's public domain. And then you can use it however you like. There's no restrictions whatsoever. You can copy it, you can edit it, you can make money from it, and so on. The second type of license is what's called a permissive license. And these are a couple of examples there. They have minimal restrictions on how this software can be used. So for example, a permissive license will allow you to use open source software commercially to make money from it. So if something's licensed under the Berkeley Standard Distribution License, or the Massachusetts Institute of Technology license, or the Apache license, you can download that software, you can change it, and you can sell it and make money from it. And you can incorporate it into bigger projects. Not a problem. You have a lot of freedoms about how to use that software. The third type of license we see is called copyleft license. And this means that if you derive any new software from this software, the new software is also covered by the license. So there's a reciprocal going on there. If you download if you download some software and you include it in your software, then the whole thing then has to be covered by that license. And in some ways, it's good because it means that you've got this software for free. If you download it for free, you know all that work has gone into it, and you've added some of your own. And in return for getting that first stuff free, you have to give your stuff that you added for free as well. So it's a reciprocal arrangement. And these are the GNU General Public License, version 2 and version 3. There's actually a lightweight General Public License and Mozilla license and others that have this copyleft. I've often heard it described as a viral license, because if you're putting together a project with lots of different components in it, different libraries, different downloads, if one of them has a copyleft license, then the whole project is going to be copyleft. So it can be problematic to commercial organization, the copyleft license. And in fact, when I've worked commercially, we always had rules to only use open source software that was either public domain or had a permissive license. As a user, of course, this doesn't really matter to you. You're not going to reuse the software. You're just going to download a binary anyway. But if you're in the business of combining different pieces of software together and pushing it as your own work, then these licenses, you've got to be really, really tight on those. Malcolm.
How does this relate to Creative Commons licenses? Have they ever been used for software?
Yeah,
copyleft sounds quite similar to one of the varieties of Creative Commons license.
Yeah, I mean, you can license software under Creative Commons. I've seen that before. The Creative Commons is really a permissive license, which means, depending on the version of the Creative Commons, you can reshare it, providing you attribute the original author. So they really are permissive license to Creative Commons.
Well, there are more subtleties. There's a non-commercial use.
Yep.
And there's also a share alike. So
yep.
Whatever you add has to come back to the originator.
Yes, exactly. So yes, with the attribution on. So for example, all slides, all the web pages I do, I license it under Creative Commons share alike. So if someone wants to copy my presentations, fine. Just keep my name in it, because that's a polite thing to do. All the software I do, I actually share under a BSD permissive license. So I do use 2 different licenses myself. As I understand it, Creative Commons is really meant for images and words and diagrams, this sort of stuff. And these licenses I've got on the screen here is really designed for software.
Yeah. I'm in the middle of a project that I know needs some kind of open source element to it. And I'm scratching my head about the kind of license. Yeah, maybe I'll come back online after you've finished your talk.
Yeah, it can be a tricky area. These licenses here, the BSD, they are written by lawyers. This is kind of quite serious stuff.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And you may well get sued if you breach them.
Yeah.
If there's a big enough organization behind it, in short. So you do have to be really careful. And it's only polite. If someone spent their lifetime giving away free software, just respect what they've been doing. Paul.
Yeah, hi. So I was wondering about the differences between machines here, Peter, particularly in the Windows and Android domain, where there's so many different drivers, video cards, and God knows what, whereas it's slightly more different in the Apple domain, where they control the hardware and software a lot tighter. If you're downloading source code, presumably you need a compiler specifically for your machine and its configuration, or you've got to download drivers from somewhere. And if you're downloading a binary, presumably you need to download a binary that's completely related to the exact hardware setup you've got.
Yes. So for some few things. So if you're downloading, if you want to build open source software, then absolutely you'll need a build environment. And the various projects, we'll have a look at GitHub in a minute, but the various projects will pretty give you a how-to guide of what you need to set up before you can start building stuff locally. There is an issue which I think you touched on there about what happens if my open source software depends on some binary library, which is licensed perhaps in some other way,
or a video driver or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, in the past, Peter, some time ago, I've written my own software, and obviously you use the development environment for the box that you're on. But now I'm getting too old and lazy. I'm probably more likely to borrow bits from here, there, and everywhere. And I'll talk about GitHub in a minute, and then try and bolt it together. And I suspect there's going to be some driver issues somewhere down the line.
Yeah. In terms of licensing, what often happens is that a binary shared library or device driver or something is a license under the LGPL, or in fact a permissive license. And so you've got the right to use it as a standalone binary without that copyleft license covering your whole project, but you couldn't use the source code and change it.
Okay. And a final bit on that, if you are using some of these open source stuff, whether it's free or just open rights, is reverse engineering allowed so that you can then, if you've got a binary, or is that still against the law?
That is covered by separate laws. That's not licensing.
Right.
I know in the US you now have the right to reverse engineer, which is written into law.
Yeah, I mean, there's a slightly legitimate use there. If you reverse engineer it just to tweak it slightly for your own purposes, which is completely different to reverse engineering it for commercial uses, isn't it?
Yeah,
or using a disassembler or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Exactly. Gordon.
Peter, I think you said that when you were working, you tended to avoid the copyleft license and go for the permissive license. Could you? I'm really interested in copyleft because I've never come across that before. Could you just say a little bit more about the sort of what was in your thinking when you were working and you were looking at?
Yes, so this wasn't my thinking. That was the company's policy. So let's say I'm building some software that has 10 open source components into it, and I download those open source components. I might compile them locally, and I add our commercial software into it, and then I ship it to our customers. And that's quite common. Pretty much everything you can think of now has open source components into it. The problem is if one of those components that we're incorporating is covered by a copyleft license, then potentially the whole thing is now that the company shifting is also covered by the copyleft license, because there's this reciprocal arrangement. If you use copyleft license source code, then your code that depends on it also has to be copyleft. So that's quite problematic from a commercial point of view, because it means you effectively have to, open source your own project if you depend on other GPL code. So commercial organizations, well, as to say, if you can find some equivalent open source code which has a more permissive license. Very often, of course, you'll find some, particularly big projects are licensed under multiple licenses, so you can choose which one applies to you. So it does get quite a bit hairy, this, if you're working in the commercial world. Neil.
Thanks.
Come on. Right. I've got a bit of confusion now for what you were saying, Paul, about you might have a copyleft license which actually allows you to undertake some part, but then is not incorporated. So reciprocity, yeah, and then you was describing a situation which if you built something for various open source elements and so on, and then you did put your own into it, that it was copied. So what was actually that distinction with Paul? Is it yeah? Can you just explain what that distinction was?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is derived works. So if I download an open source project that's got, say, 1 million lines of source code licensed under a copyleft license, and I think, I can make a fast one here. I can add one line to the 1 million lines of code, add my little bit of customization, and I can sell that commercially. The copyleft license is designed to stop that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's more about, someone's put an awful lot of effort into developing something. They've released it in this copyleft license. By all means, download it, use it, modify it, whatever. But what you can't do is change the license on that or some derived works.
Okay. Yeah. I think I understand the distinction.
Another way of looking at it is that you can include MIT licensed components in GPL software, but not the other way around.
Yeah. Good point.
So, and the reason for that, so most software is basically a collection of libraries. So with GPL, you could have some of the libraries of GPL licensed, some of them MIT, and that's perfectly compliant with the licensing. But you can't issue an overall application with an MIT license if even just one of the libraries it incorporates is GPL.
Yes, very well put. Thank you. Okay, so just some random examples of some open source projects. We mentioned some of them before. Linux, very pervasive operating system. Apache web server. Git is a extremely important and common tool used in software development. I'm going to look at that a little bit more. Things like Docker, that's open source. I didn't realize that. At least the runtime, I think, is open source. Kubernetes is a massive open source project that's used to deploy complex cloud-based applications consisting of hundreds of separate components, and automatically starts and stops applications when the load goes up and so on. PostgreSQL we talked about. A while back there was a company, I believe in Germany, who wrote a office application called Star Office, and they decided to open source it. And then that was forked. We'll talk about fork in a minute, to OpenOffice, and OpenOffice was forked into LibreOffice. So you get these knock-on effects sometimes. Android is an open source project, and what happens there is Android itself is open source. Then Google add in their specific parts before they ship operating systems out. And we'll talk about AI at the end because there's some special cases there which might be of interest. I'm going to talk a little bit more about software development and particularly some tools that software developers use. Doesn't matter if you don't understand the details of this, but I'm going to bring it all together in a minute about some online tools that you actually might want to use. And before you get involved with open source, understanding a little bit about these things is actually quite useful. So the first thing a developer needs is some sort of way to control their source code. So I mentioned in the first slide, we've got source code, which is lots of files, probably written in several different computer languages. We might have images, we might have configurations, we might have language translations, we might have a whole bunch of different types of things. And these are all bundled together and called the source code of the project. And because there's so many files, these files being changed by different people in the team in different time zones, Some people are going to make a mistake and you might have to roll back to the previous version and so on. Actually having a tool to manage the source code is really quite important. And so you get these source code control systems, and Git is currently the most famous or most commonly used source code control systems. And it allows you to manage your files, and it allows you to create copies before you make a release, for example. Allows you to compare different versions. If you've just made a change, or someone else has made a change in the source code and it's broken something, then you can compare different versions of different files to see what was changed and so on. It really is essential to anyone writing code to have a source code control system. But there's loads of others. SCCS, I think, was one of the original ones, source code control systems. And then there was revision control systems, concurrent version systems, and so on. Many other source code control systems. Most people just use Git. And of course, during the lifetime of an open source project, you're going to get bug reports coming in. You're going to get people raising enhancement requests, even if it's silly things like, please change blue to red on your display or something like that. Projects need a way to track individual issues so that they can be looked at by the developers and they can be worked on and then closed, or perhaps, just labeled, we're not going to look at this particular new feature. The most common way for issue tracking these days is via what I've called an integrated server. But you can get other systems like Bugzilla or Jira or Confluence, loads of other systems which allows you to create and track and close individual issues that affect the source code. Of course, we've got editors and build environments. Visual Code Studio seems to be quite popular at the moment, but there's loads and loads of different ways to edit and build your systems. The interesting thing, which is why I'm going through this list, is most people these days use an integrated server, and by far the most popular integrated server is GitHub. By its name, you can tell it uses the Git source code control system under the covers, but it includes many more features, and we'll have a look at some screenshots in a minute. But of course, there's others: SourceForge, GitEA, GitLab, CodeBird, and so on and so forth. But GitHub is by far the most popular, even though it's owned by Microsoft now. But there we go. And this is what GitHub looks like. GitHub.com, and it's a web page. It's a web server, and let's get my pointer here. We can see up here we've got a tab for code, so you can click on that and you can see the source code for your project. We've got a tab here for issues, so if you want to look at issues or raise one or whatever, you can click on that. Paul, go on then, you can interrupt me.
Oh, sorry, it's just a quick one. If you're dragging stuff off GitHub, could it be under one of multiple licensing regimes, or is it all freeware if it's on GitHub?
No, each project will have its own license.
Oh, great! I thought so. Yeah.
Yeah. So in fact, you'll see it here.
Yeah. Okay.
This is the license that applies for this particular project. So that's the license. This project I'm looking at here is Friendica, which is the software stack that we use for u3a.social. So this is a source code for our Fediverse-based social site. And so, yeah, we can see all the source code here, and you can click through the folders and navigate it as you would expect. You can look at the code, you can raise issues, look at the licenses. And in fact, you can go further. You can see here we've got actions, which is a way to build the project in the cloud. You might have some wiki, some security, or some insights about how many people are part of the project and so on. And actually down the bottom here, we can see the releases. This particular project's made 43 releases. And as a user, you can go in there and click and download the binary that's been built. So the process on GitHub is that many people will contribute to the source code. They'll probably play with it locally and then what's called committing it. which gets uploaded to the server, and then GitHub will kick off some actions to do a build. It will run the test cases, and if the test cases pass, it will generate a, maybe a nightly release. And then when the humans come along and say, yes, this release is good, we're going to make a permanent release, and you'll go through the process and you'll see a release there. So GitHub and the similar sites are really quite nice because it combines everything to do with this open source project. Not only the source code, but the people, because you have to log in to use this. You can use it to track issues and to raise issues. You can use it to build it, publish releases, and so on. So if you are using open source software, even if you're only downloading a binary, you should get familiar with this, because if you find a bug, you probably want to engage with the community via a site like this, report the issue, have a discussion with them, and so on. A little more on source code control. How are we doing for time? That's okay, good. So go on, Neil.
Dan,
Okay.
just a quick one on that. Is there some sort of alert system or something? Or
Absolutely, yep.
yeah.
You can see it
okay.
here. You can see it here. Watch.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
So if, for example, you are interested to know when the next release of LibreOffice is available, you find its GitHub page and you can watch it, and then you get an email when the next release comes out. And there's lots of different alerts you can get.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Good.
So a little on source code control. Oh, go on, David. You can unmute. Amateurs, eh?
Are you going to mention VS Codium?
Not specifically, but you can go ahead.
Okay. So it's weird licensing. So VS Code is open source, but in effect, it's owned by Microsoft. But when you download the VS Code product, it's not open source. Right? So the source code is MIT license, I think. But what happens is that Microsoft incorporate telemetry, so they get feedback from your usage of the tool. And so that they generate the binary, and that's what you download when you download VS Code. So there's another project, there's a open source project called VS Codium, which has forked the source, the open source, and they produce a version of a binary that doesn't have the telemetry in. So something can say open source, but it might not be. So you still have to be quite careful about what the licensing is, and therefore what the restrictions on its use are and what your obligations might be.
Good points. I actually didn't know that there was a fork of that. Okay, so a little bit more on source code just to get our heads around it. So we talked at the beginning that the source code is a bunch of files, different types of files. And of course, they've got versions. So your C source code for Hello World is going to go from version 1 to version 2 to version 3, and so on. And of course, we're talking about teams accessing the code. This isn't always used by a single person playing at home. This could be tens, hundreds, thousands of people working together in different time zones to access the same set of files. So developers update these files over time. Changes are committed so that other people can see those changes. Versions allow the changes to compared. If you've made a mistake, you can undo and go back to the previous version. Now, whole projects can be branched. And this means that if you've got a project, which is, you can imagine all the separate files, their versions are slowly incrementing over time. What you can do, you can take a snapshot or a branch of this tree for a specific purpose. And what often happens is what's called the main branch of the source code goes along forever, but every so often the developers will take a branch ready to create a release. And this gives stability to the developers. So they're working on a branch ready for a release, whereas developers might be working on future features on the main branch, and they don't, trip over each other's toes. So branches you'll see a lot of, and you may see a branch per release. You might see, a development branch, a testing branch, and so on and so forth. So the details don't really matter, but I want to make sure that you'll often see branches for particular reasons. And if you're reporting an issue on an open source project, you probably need to know what branch of it are you reporting. Are you running the very latest? Are you running the latest stable version? Are you running a testing version, and so on? Yeah, so for example, a branch can be created for a release. What you can also do is across different projects, you can copy the whole project into a brand new tree and work on it completely independent of the original. And that's what's called a fork. So as I said before, there was a project called StarOffice, which was open sourced. And then the OpenOffice team took a copy of it, a whole copy of it, took a snapshot, was called a fork, and started to work on that independently of StarOffice. And then LibreOffice came along and they did exactly the same thing to OpenOffice. So you see this idea of a fork, and this is a complete copy of an open source project from a server on Git or something. Hopefully that's clear. I didn't want to get too much into it, just to raise the fact that sometimes you'll see these terms branch and fork. And a branch is a local branch of the project for particular purposes, like making a release. And a fork is a different person making a copy of the complete software, so they can work on it completely independent to the original one. So StarOffice was forked to OpenOffice, which was forked to LibreOffice, as an example. Say the details don't really matter, but you might see these terminologies. So here's the big thing, really. If you're using open source software, how do you get support? How do you get help? And it's going to vary, because all these open source projects, these teams that are working on them, particularly the big projects, are going to organize themselves in different ways. They might have different roles. They might have different sensitivities, shall we say. So these are usually supported by volunteers, people giving up their time because they believe it's the right thing to do. They could be the original developers, and they tend to be pretty busy people. So if you've, you're using Linux and you found an issue with it, the last thing you do is get on the phone to Linus and say, fix this bug. You've got to approach the team in the way they're expected to be approached. So number one is to read the instructions. So if you want to report an issue, read up how to report an issue. And you'll usually find that as a file in the source code called README or some other way. It's going to be obvious. So read the instructions. Step two, read the instructions again. And so, you can really, really upset people if you fail to read the instructions and you've jumped in screaming at them saying, your software is rubbish. It's, not fit for purpose. And they'll just say, did you read this? And there's an onus on you as a reporter for an issue or to engage with the project to do as much as possible yourself first. So do an internet search to see if someone else has reported a similar issue or got a similar type of problem. See what their solution was. Try their solution out first. Find a user forum who can offer help. Sometimes that's the way these projects work. Instead of going to the source code, maybe there's a separate forum, a wiki of frequently asked questions. search if the issue has already been reported. What you found, someone else may have already found it. The developers might be working on it as you speak. And if you go in there and raise a new issue, reporting this bug, they'll just close it down and, tell you you're being stupid. You should have done your research first. And finally, once you've got to a point where you think, well, actually, I've got something new here, I do need to let them know of an issue, or I've got a suggestion for a new feature, or even better, you've got a fix for a problem, then report it on a tracking system such as GitHub Issues. And of course, if you can, this is the best way to engage with projects. If you can, make the fix yourself and submit a pull request. The bottom line is, with open source, getting help with open source projects, you really have to do your research first, help yourself first before reaching out to the project team. And of course, if you get good at using a particular software package, like, I don't know, let's say GIMP, you're into photography and do lots of editing and you use software a lot, then, give something back to the community and start answering questions on the forum. Things that you may have got stuck with last year, you've now understood, you can help other people get past that point as well. And you have to treat open source software, I think, really as a community of users, not official commercial support that's going to offer you fixes by the next working day. And this is GitHub. And I mentioned this before, you can click on the issues tab up here, and you can go through and you can do search for existing issues, whether they're open or closed. So the first thing you do, you're going to enter something in this box here and search for, whatever your bug is, and you'd be certain that hasn't been reported before. And eventually you're going to get to a point where you're going to create a new issue and you can hit the button. And very typically you're led through the process of creating an issue. Are you raising a new bug, a feature request, or just a question or support, or a community support item? And again, once you click through there, you probably get your form pre-filled in with lots of hints and tips about what information the team wants and what versions they need. And you'll often see this sort of thing here. Have you really searched that this bug hasn't been reported before? So they do try, really quite hard to help you out. So the problem is, these guys are giving up their time. They're getting all these issues thrown at them. The last thing they want is duplicate issues coming in, or issues that have been fixed in the last release or whatever. So it is really easy to make yourself unpopular with these projects. However, if you go through these process and carefully report issues and work with the project teams, they can get to really like you, and you actually join the community and start to contribute. And I suppose the big question is, can I help? You might find yourself using 2 or 3 open source projects a lot. And, you're retired and think, well, actually, I've got some time free. I can chip in a bit on this and help out. So can you help? And, the quick answer is yes. Most projects are very welcoming to newcomers and new contributors. Obviously, if you're a developer who got some experience, or, just really a brain in your head, you can fix bugs. You can create enhancements and so on. But that's not most of us. I realize that. But if you're not a developer and don't have software development skills, you can still contribute. You can add and fix translations. Projects are screaming out for people who can do proper human-based translations. You can fix documentation. Maybe you've jumped into a project and you've read the documentation, you started using it. So, actually, no one's updated the documentation since the previous version. Well, here's your chance. Go in and fix the documentation so that other users don't come across the same problems. Create useful bug reports. If you're reporting an issue, getting that skills to actually figure out what the project team needs and create that in the bug report so they can look at that bug report pretty quickly, see all the information you provided, and they can fix it quicker rather than coming back to you and saying, asking you lots of questions. And indeed, most projects have a how to contribute section. So on GitHub, the typical process is you fork their project. So you create a new account on GitHub. You click on the icon, which is fork, and you make a whole copy of the whole project into your account. So now you've got a copy of the source code, which you can play around with without affecting the main one. You can check things in, you can break things without touching the original. You make changes, you test and commit into your version. Again, you're probably just simply following the contribute instructions. And then there's a button which is submit pull request. And a pull request is the differences between your fork and the main fork. And that goes into an issue, and then the developers can review that and they can decide to apply your changes to the main source or come back to you with further questions. So it's a little bit involved, but you'll always get a contributing note here, how to contribute. And in this case, again, this is Friendica. They've got lots of links for junior jobs or documentation jobs or translations. They really want you to reach out to help. So, but again, there's a very much a people-y type issue here. You can't treat them as a generic commercial support company. You're working with them, you're joining a community, you're trying to help, you're trying to make things better. And finally, I think this is my final piece on here. These poor guys working on open source projects are very often unpaid volunteers. They give up their time because they feel it's the right thing to do. They feel, there should be an alternative to Microsoft Office, which is free and open for everyone to use. It's a belief system that they've got. So why not? If we're retired and rich, why not donate a little bit? That'll give them a chance to buy a new server, some new tools to help build the projects. And they tend to be really grateful for donations. So you get Buy Me a Coffee, you get PayPal, donate, of course, Patreon process, and so on. So again, if you're using these free open source projects and you use anything a lot, I think it's reasonable just to throw a fiver or effectively buy these guys a beer in return. Or GoFundMe. So finally, really finally this time, you can tell I've not reviewed my slides very well, is I know what I haven't done. I haven't hit record, Oh dear. So we've got the special case of generative AI. So we see projects like ChatGPT and so on, which is running on a cloud server. And they are closed projects, closed source projects. So you've got no idea what they're doing. But there are some so-called open source generative AI. And so if a generative AI project or model is tagged as open source, it means you can actually download it and use it yourself. You might not have the hardware to run it, but you've got the rights to download it. And Hugging Face is a bit like GitHub for generative AI. Hugging Face, you can do searches for generative AI models. If you're doing, looking for language translations, you can, put those keywords in and find the right open source model for you to use in there. But here's the thing with open source generative AI. To be truly open source, you should be able to train the model from scratch. In other words, go through this build process. What when generative AI models are tagged as open source, it generally means you can just download them, not reproduce the training. So really, when you see an open source generative AI, it's probably not really open source. It doesn't give you everything you need. But there are some projects that will give you everything you need. If you really want to try building a generative AI model yourself, there are some places where you can get the whole lot truly open source to replicate the training process. So I think the use of open source in generative AI is really pushing the definition a bit sometimes. Okay, so that's the last of the slides. Open for comments of open source. Let me stop sharing. So anyone want to raise any comments about open source, or indeed anything else, if we want to throw anything else in? What time is it? 4:30. We're doing well for time. Okay, I'm not seeing any comments so far.
I would like to thank you very much for this talk, Peter. There's very few U3A sessions like this that I have learnt so much of a very practical and useful nature as this. I am hugely indebted to you for what I've learnt from you today, and I greatly look forward to reviewing the recording when you share it. This broadcast of yours is something that has filled a huge need for myself, and I'm sure a lot of other people. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you for saying that. I do appreciate that.
I'd just like to mention that in my experience, that there's an awful lot of suspicion amongst people about open source software. That an awful lot of people I know, especially with mobile apps, they really don't get that this thing that I think it was Mark Zuckerberg actually made it crystal clear on national television when he was interviewed by Congress, that if it's free online, you are the product, and there's no such thing as something being free. And his company has built up to many billions from harvesting people's a profile and selling that to advertisers. So I do go hiking with the U3A, and I often have discussions with people who really don't know about FOSS, free open source software. I call it FOSS, but I understand there are some differences. But there really is a huge difference. And often if you are using a website that doesn't require you to log in, then it's not harvesting your information. And when I was asked recently about using Zoom. One of my Linux group was asking about Zoom, and they couldn't get it going on Linux. And I explained that that's because you don't need to install an app. And the reason that Zoom pushes their app to everyone when you're trying to join a Zoom call is because they want you to have an account. They want to be harvesting who you're associating with. It's all about harvesting your personal data. And one of the huge benefits of open source software is often it's not for profit, and you're not being the product of some insidious spying operation.
Quite.
Yeah, it makes some good points. Obviously we've been talking about the Fediverse a lot recently for all those reasons that you mentioned. Really, as soon when you bring commercializations or money into a project, and it's free, as you say, you don't have to pay for it. These guys got to get the money from somewhere. Meta is must be $1 trillion company and have very few products. They get all their money from advertising revenue and by selling your data in effect. So no, it's a good points made there. Thank you. Paul.
Yeah, a couple of questions, Peter. On the licensing, I mean, they're often quite verbose, and you'd need to have a PhD in law to understand half the stuff that's written these days. Do they actually do a lot? I mean, if you're just downloading something for personal use and you're not commercial, is there actually a lot of policing and checking going on that?
No, there's no checking of licenses. So you are creating work and you're attaching a license to that. And that license is going to be applied to whoever decides to use your work. So there's no checking or something. What I would say though, if you use GitHub and you create a new project, it'll actually take you through what type of license is most likely going to apply to your work to help you through the legal process.
So if you're just using some software for your own personal use, it's unlikely to hit a problem. But I remember years ago when I had Ball and C++ as a assembler and development environment, they had a simple A5 license sheet. They basically said, you can use this for anything you want. You can give it to anybody you want, but treat it like a book. Only one of you can use it at any one time. And since then it's become like 150 pages of small print, hasn't it?
Well, some of these licenses are actually quite small.
Are they?
Look at them. Yeah.
I glaze over when I see them normally.
Yeah. But it's good to have a small number of fixed licenses like MIT and GPL or something, because that most of us should know what that involves. Whether it's
right. Yeah.
And to be honest, the licenses mostly applies not to the generator of the project, but the consumer, particularly if you're going to try and reuse that into something else. If you're just an end user consuming open source software, then it doesn't really affect you. You're just going to go ahead and use it.
Yeah. Okay. So the other question I had, and it relates to what somebody said just earlier, is it because you can imagine what the various thugs around the world are up to, the Russians and the Chinese and a few other people. Are there cases where somebody somewhere has put something on GitHub and or open source software that actually is dangerous to run and use, or does it all tend to get filtered out by the community?
Yes, that absolutely does happen, particularly with ecosystems that are quite complex. So Python springs immediately to mind. So there's if you're a Python writer, you tend to download, probably hundreds of separate little modules so that you can use in your code. And there's various repositories online that host these little modules. And absolutely, some of these modules have got contaminated by a rogue software developer and has actually spread and ended up deployed with security issues in it. So absolutely it does happen. The big projects tend to be really tight on security though, and have a well-defined security process. Doesn't allow anyone to make changes. You submit a pull request and that gets checked by the project before it gets merged in. But yeah, from time to time mistakes do happen and things slip through.
So does code get signed when it goes into GitHub and then it can't be changed without flagging the signature warning?
The project teams that own that repository will approve anything that goes in.
Yeah. Okay. And another slightly related question on this: there's always the law of unintended consequences. So somebody might have written a piece of code that is meant to do what it says it does, but if you don't understand quite how it does things, particularly with things like C and pointers and things, you can end up completely overwriting your space or having a Stack Overflow, that kind of stuff. I'm guessing there's not everybody writes in the comments what protections or what please use this, but please be aware that it can do this if you're not careful how you deploy it.
Yeah, I mean, this is where testing comes in. We really want robust test cases if you're doing anything sort of like non-personal or non-trivial. Just on a back of that, I wasn't going to mention this, but I will, I think. open source projects are getting inundated now by changes which have been generated by generative AI. It is quite easy to write code now with generative AI, or fix bugs with it and so on. And these teams of people are just getting overrun with poorly generated code from generative AI. And many projects now have a policy that says if any code has been written by AI, they will simply reject it straight away. They'll have a policy that all code that gets put into a repository has to be reviewed by a human.
Yeah, the only other alternative would be to have a separate bucket saying this is untested code, use at peril.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, it's open source, so if you want to fork a project and make your own changes, you can absolutely do that.
Yeah, thank you,
Peter.
Okay, I want a couple of who writes most of the open source, please?
Say that again.
Who's authoring most of the open source, please?
It's actually a surprising wide range of people. So you get hobbyists really who've got there might be a plumber or bricklayer or something, and in the evening they're kind of I'm gonna write a bit of code and actually self-train themselves so they can actually be quite productive in writing code. You'll also get commercial people who are either writing code as part of their company work, which is open source, or maybe in the evenings they go and work on their own like skunk work projects, if you like, and share it to other people. And then you get people like us who are time rich, if you like, being retired, will actually start writing code and contributing and making the world a better place. So absolutely massive wide range of different types of contributors, both in what they do. If there's people who write code, there's people who do artwork, there's people who do translations and so on and so forth. And there's lots of people with so many different backgrounds and training and experiences.
Nationalities?
Absolutely, yeah. The big projects are simply worldwide. You'll see changes going in at every single time zone.
Okay. Second point, I want to make a little bit of thinking here. Everything out there has to be sustainable in one form or other. So financially, the thing has to be sustainable or not, as the case may be. That's the reality. And the internet pretty much was founded on the advertising model, as far as I can make out. That's the way it worked. All of them went down that route because people didn't want to pay for the services. They'd rather have the adverts flung at them rather than pay the money. And I think that's the growing up one's got to do, is to have, when you have these services, is you want to get rid of the adverts, because YouTube, for example, offer the ability to get rid of all those annoying ads. It costs £8 a month. It's not a lot of money. So really, you've got to say to yourself, as a responsible user, how do I want to live my life? Do I want to be bombarded with adverts all the time, or do I want to pay some money out? I think most of us need to recognize that as a way of being. We can't get everything for free. It doesn't make sense to me, because that's not reality at the end of the day. As you say, a lot of generous people who put a lot of time in, but it's not what I regard as a sustainable model in the long term. That's all I'd say.
Of course, what you're talking about there is online services, not really open source software.
Okay,
so that's the first thing. But I would argue against some of your assumptions there. In the early days of the internet, it absolutely was open and free for everyone. You go look through Tim Berners-Lee's visions of the internet, and it absolutely was like that at the beginning, until the commercial companies came in and started, as some would say, ruining it.
That's not quite right, Peter. These things came out of DARPA. A lot of the things came out of DARPA. All the protocols came out of DARPA.
Yep.
A lot of the work was funded out of where did Berners-Lee work? He worked at CERN, didn't he?
Yep.
So really, it was a lot of spin-off. It didn't come magic. It didn't come out of thin air. DARPA put a lot of effort in. Volt BBN put a lot of effort into the internet and the protocols, but it was funded in some form by large companies doing things either for governments or for a mixture of governments, where a lot of this stuff came from. It didn't come out of thin air.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So at the beginning, as you say, DARPANET was government-sponsored projects. But if you have a look at all the early internet standards, the RFCs, you'll see they are authored by either independent people working at universities doing their PhDs, or big companies, like Intel and Xerox and so on. So it's a collaboration, but the purpose, the original Tim Berners-Lee purpose of the World Wide Web was to be open for everyone to use with no commercializations. Of course, now, as you say, the big sites like Facebook and Google and so on, they have to fund their servers somehow, and so the way they do it, they either charge for their services or they get the revenue from advertising. But now, of course, we're seeing pushes back on that from places like the Fediverse, where instead of having one single corporate company, one particular big service, we have a collection of community-built servers, which are built from the hobbyists, giving up their time and their server to make life a better place, so you can have these social networks without the commercialization and the billionaires and the political leanings that you get on these big sites. So there definitely always is an alternative to these commercializations of these servers, I think. Have I gone too political?
I think you have a bit. I think you can take a mixed world. I think Microsoft were probably forced to make Windows. I think they got to a point where they couldn't police Windows. Too many pirate copies of Windows. And so I think to a certain extent, they tried to charge for Windows and it didn't work. And so basically, I think they've probably gone down the advertising route. So they saw a lot of other organizations do it. So it's us who've done it to a certain extent, Peter. I don't hold myself as blameless. I like to make decisions on a rational basis if I can. Not always true, not always possible, but I don't, in my own mind, expect something for nothing. And I do expect to have to pay a reasonable fee, whatever reasonable means, sometimes, or I'd say. I think it is, as you say, a lot of people are very generous on their time. I do accept that. And they probably enjoy it as well. But I suspect behind the scenes, they must be making enough money by another source to be able to do it. That's all I'd say.
Tom.
Yeah, I think there's a danger if any organization is commercial, then it might launch a product where you pay a monthly subscription. But if it's got shareholders, the danger is there's more money in the spying than in the subscription, and this is where I see the evolution of the computing world in my recent lifetime as that IBM thought the money was in the hardware, and then they went to a fellow called Bill Gates, and he spotted that all the money was in the software. And then after Bill Gates, we had Mark Zuckerberg, who said, actually, it's not in any of those. The money is in the spying and harvesting personal information. So if any service online is completely free, then it is like, and even if you pay a subscription, and if it's closed source, you've got no guarantee they're not harvesting your data, despite saying they're not. It's not something that one should be naive about. I think when an organization is truly not for profit, then there's some hope that you can trust them. And obviously you've got some services like OpenStreetMaps, which is an outstanding mapping of the whole world. It's the equivalent of Wikipedia, but for maps. And that is all contributor developed. And I think their website probably is funded by donations. And I posted in the comments as a website service I use, using it today because, you know, in the walking group, one has to kind of take a turn at leading walks, and it's a GPX editor online, and it has a begging bowl for donations, but they profess that they will not take advertising, and it'll always be free. It's an outstanding service. You don't have to log into it. Most other online hiking sites and whatever, you have to create an account, and they tell you it's a free account. But giving them your account means they know who you are, so they're harvesting your data, you know, from the get-go. So I think paying a subscription isn't always going to be the answer to privacy.
Okay, let me ask a simple question of people, can I? How many people give money to Wikipedia, please? Could you raise your hands, please? How many is that, Peter, roughly, out of that whole lot?
Yeah, I'll say about a third.
You are the exception. Yeah,
Well,
that's the reality. That's the reality. I also give money to Wikipedia scrupulously because they do such a fantastic job, and that's a great job. But only about 2% actually, according to Wikipedia anyway, when I get the notices, only about 2% actually do.
I'll make a comment there. It might not be available in Britain for much longer because of what Starmer's doing.
That would be very sad.
With his Online Safety Act, and until the government guarantees to get off everybody's back and allow things like Wikipedia to do what they do, I don't want to chuck money down the drain. There's a limited amount of money on a pension that you can sponsor things. And frankly, I'm spending my effort at the moment barraging my MP about this ridiculous act.
Up to you guys. I'm just making the point about these things when they're done voluntarily. You pay your money, you take your choice. That's what I'm saying to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I've just lost access to a load of university lectures because it wants to see my identity documents like passport and stuff. There's no way any of that is age 18. So, you know, we're in serious problems in this country with the internet being split in two. I'm not trying to be political, but it's absolute intellectual vandalism as far as I can see. And it's not achieving the effect it is meant to achieve.
Okay, fair enough.
Is the possible answer there to go through a VPN?
Well, no, they're trying to ban those now or put those behind an age gate. I use a VPN, but the problem is, if you're using a VPN to get around it, you're going to be coming out in another country. Otherwise, there's no point. And then you get things that are tailored towards that country, you know, in terms of language, currency, all sorts of culture and things like that. So that is the problem with using the VPN. I am pleased that both Apple and Wikipedia are taking the UK government to court about this, because the legislation was well intended, but it's not going to do what it says it does. It's not going to stop teenagers on social media bullying each other. They can do that in the playground anyway. And what it is doing is creating a huge load of problems for legitimate adults that aren't doing anything illegal at all.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more.
It is as Orwellian as you can get, I'm afraid. Perhaps we need a separate talk, Peter, but
I've opened a Pandora's box. My apologies.
No, you haven't. You've raised a very good point, actually. And Wikipedia do ask for funds, and I've written back to them and said, when you get guarantees, you know, that you're staying in the UK, then maybe I will, as my financial situation improves after a divorce, maybe I will start to make some more contributions and things.
Maybe you've got a volunteer to do a talk there then, Paul.
I could probably set you an agenda for it.
Oh, no.
No, I could do some of it. I could do some of it. It will get very irate at times, I think, because I am very irate about it, as are a lot of people I know in the technical community. You're probably aware of them anyway, with the various things like the EFF and things like that.
So have we got any other comments about open source software then? Pete, you got your hand up. Ray, you got your hand up. I don't know if it was just a hand up from the ad hoc vote that we had. All right, so I'm not seeing any hands up. Unless anyone's got any volunteers for next month, I'm probably going to look at email delivery, just because it's driving me nuts at the moment. I've learned a lot more about how email works these days than I ever wanted to know. So thank you for coming along, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you,
I'm
Peter. Good
interested in
session.
email too.
Thanks, Peter.
Scott.
Yeah,
Thank you.
brilliant.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you
Yeah,
next
thanks
month.
ever so much.
Bye.
A
Fantastic.
quick one on that. I know I've got a U3A social email. It's Gordon. If you've still got 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
I know someone kindly gave me a U3A social email. If you're talking about email, could you actually let me know how I access it? Because I don't know.
U3A.social is a Fediverse site. It does send out emails for notification, but essentially it's an online social media site. So you get a handle which happens to look a lot like an email address, but it isn't. It's just, your name at U3A.social, and that's your Fediverse handle, which you can use to talk to other people online. It's not an email address.
Oh, okay. Shows how little I know. And really interested in the copyleft license, because I've not come across that concept at all before. And I was involved in some, software development for user interfaces, and it all went pear-shaped. This is, 15 years ago. But I mean, we did spend, 5 years developing some interface software that worked. And I didn't know what to do with it because I was the owner. And it's a question of, how do you put something out there without it being exploited by the big American companies? And is there a way of, putting something back in to the community without, being ripped off? So I think I've just got to go away and have a serious think about whether that 5 years worth of. So I didn't do the software development because I'm a user interface guy, but the guys that did it were really smart and got some pretty magic stuff working. But we were screwed by a big American company who
licensing won't prevent that. I got screwed on software as well. But for example, in 3D printing, there was the printers basically worked based on quite complex open source software. That was the software that sat in the printer. And then you get the Chinese manufacturers come along. They forked that software because it was available on GitHub repository. They then filed off the serial numbers, did their tweaks, but then they put it out as their own software. Right now, but you could no longer you couldn't access it, so you didn't know what they were doing, and the chances are a large chunk of it was telemetry, right, reporting back to base, but also other things. But it meant basically they ripped off the original authors, and there's nothing the authors could do. If for example, you can't even do it with patents, right, because you rely on either your government supporting you, or you have to pay lawyers vast amounts of money in that particular country, right? And if that country is not friendly towards a legal process, then that doesn't work either. So at the end of the day, I don't believe there's any protection for people who produce software and release it freely.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because I went over to China, in the early 2020s, and I didn't like what they were proposing. They wanted access to the source code, and I knew what was going to happen. We get ripped off, so I steered well clear of that.
Oh, it's guaranteed because their view was that if it's been published, then it's freely available for use by anybody. I mean, they have the same view of hardware. We sold telecommunication systems, and the first batch that went out literally had to be padlocked. The PCBs had to be padlocked into the cabinets to stop them taking out. It didn't stop them.
No,
so they stopped.
nothing will stop
them.
No, that's the problem. I mean, I got the patents for the interface eventually after about 6 years, but even the patent office didn't understand what we were saying until we actually showed them, and that needed the software to work. Took it out to Japan to show Docomo, who loved it, but got screwed by the handset manufacturer who just didn't pay his bills. So, 5 years worth, 6 years worth of work just went up and was just left. And I still think it was maybe too far ahead of its time, because we had it working on mobile phones and computers and home automation systems and photocopiers, and it was just consistent across the whole range and very, very intuitive.
Yeah, I think it's got to the point where if it's a thing, you can't protect it.
Right.
Because it can be copied with software. You're offering the source, so they have the crown jewels directly. You can't protect the value of it. Yeah.
So I'm better to keep the software secure and safe and secret, and not let it be used.
Well, you can let it be used, but not release the source. Yeah.
Okay. Trouble is, it costs such a lot of time and money to develop software. I mean, literally 5 years worth of a small team of people just doing one thing to develop a new user interface, and we managed to get it all working. And so I look at the handset today and think we had something better 20 years ago, but we just couldn't get it to market.
No.
So I need to think about it carefully. But really interesting session on open source, because we used open source in the development as well. Good stuff, really good stuff. Interesting.
All right, we're kind of
I'll leave you to it.
So, okay. I'll thanks for those comments. I'll speak to you next month.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.
Bye.